and accept that. Similar tendencies exist in the upper spheres of the government and state organizations. In the ANC, we must tackle these tendencies and disrupt the corrupt connections between public sector officials and the parasitic and bureaucratic regime. Working class and progressive sectors of government. The ANC needs to organization unify and ensure that ANC-led governments at all levels serve the people diligently and capably. We welcome that the ANC is actually embarking on a renewal process. The ANC will continue to support this as a matter of principle and strategic imperative, while recognizing that ANC renewal will not happen without popular mobilization from within the movement and beyond it, against corruption and against anti-liberal austerity. This is being the majority. For this reason, strengthen an independent SACP that is committed to the reconfiguration of our alliance, which is capable of its own autonomous activity. Building an ever-strong SACP and asserting the independent role of the party in all respects, including in engaging in alliances and forging popular fronts. This is essential to secure meaningful democracy in our country, strengthening our. The renewal of the ANC my apologies. The renewal of the ANC cannot just be a moralistic issue. It must be based on a program. This must include rejecting neoliberalism and putting people before profit. As part of the renewal, we need to strengthen the building of a progressive women's movement and the progressive youth alliance. This is one of the key tasks the SACP will take forward in the coming period. The SACP fully supports 16 days of activism against gender-based violence campaign and calls upon its structures, members, and the working class as a whole to drive this campaign as an everyday campaign throughout the year. Our country will not thrive if it does not end such despicable violence against more than half of the population. As an everyday campaign. On economic and broader social transformation, this is what the Central Committee said. As the political report made clear, a turnaround against the economic crisis characterized by rising high level of unemployment, poverty, and inequality is unlikely unless South Africa adopts, a change in policy action. At the center of the change must be the imperative to build a new economy. This requires the pursuit of structural transformation and broader social development to create employment at large scale, eradicate poverty, and systematically eliminate inequality. The SACP will strengthen, expand, and intensify its effort to build wider working class unity, power, and hegemony in all key sides of the broader political structure, including also building and seeking to have our impact on the political space and its significant centers of power in our society. It is imperative to pursue structural and systematic transformation of the economy. In fact, our message is that the structural constraints in our economy and the high level of poverty, inequality, and unemployment in themselves have contributed to the poor electoral by the AIDS. This transformation needs to be supported with changes in the macroeconomic framework and in industrial and sectoral policies, so that these focus on creating employment, eradicate poverty, and systematically eliminate inequality. The policy changes required should include a review of the South African Reserve Bank mandate to make sustainable employment creation a key part of monetary policy outcomes and evaluation. The SACP takes a deep view of the Reserve Bank's decision to increase the repurchase, what is known as the repo rate. Increases in the repo rate impact the productive sector and employment creation negatively. For example, as they represent an increase in the cost of finance. The commercial banks that the Reserve Bank relies on as its key monetary policy transmission channel have already instructed bond repaying homeowners to cough out more. The increase in the repo rate is more bad news in the context of rising fuel prices, more likely to result in increased transport costs affecting the working class, the middle strata, and transportation of goods. As a matter of fact, already, the major transport carriers in the taxi industry have already increased their fares. Reducing the cost of finance and maintaining low long-term is critical, we are often viewed, to building national productivity and production, creating employment, and by extension, reducing poverty and tackling the crisis of social reproduction. Crisis of social reproduction will mean the crisis faced by many families and households to make ends meet. Reducing the cost of finance, realigning the macroeconomic framework to support a progressive social policy, industrialization, and achieving inclusive growth has become more urgent than when this commitment was made in the May 29 ANC general election. The manifesto, that 2019 manifesto, was supported by the Alliance and the majority of the electorate through a democratic vote. Besides the changes required in the macroeconomic framework and social policy, it is also essential to review and make changes in other pillars of our overall policy space, including trade and industrial policy, as we have said. Each policy must have employment creation targets reviewed and the impact of its policies on this with an intention of strengthening employment creation. In other words, we are saying that all government policies, especially macroeconomic policies, must be evaluated and be aligned with the goals of employment creation. That's why then the Central Committee continued to say, in this period now and the forthcoming period, we must wage the struggle on two fronts. Popular forces and the broad working class needs to conduct the struggle on these two fronts. On the one hand, we must wage a struggle against state-captured networks and their fake so-called parity agenda and machinery, who project themselves as the advocates of public ownership, while in fact they are defending corrupt activities and individuals and the very looting of the affected public entities that they claim they are representing or that they are champions of. On the other hand, we must fight against the neoliberal networks that are pushing for the standardization of the state through measures that curtail or deprive public investment of adequate or any budgetary resources. And these neoliberal initiatives are aimed at facilitating private wealth accumulation by profit-seeking interests. This has now led to a situation that has rolled back state investment and participation in the economy on behalf of people. For example, instead of ramping up investment in renewable power generation to secure the future of public participation and also in securing energy provision and supply, the neoliberal networks instead are obsessed with pushing private control in favor of profit-seeking interests. How can we forget in South Africa that the problems plaguing ESCOM, for instance, today were created by neoliberalism under the macroeconomic framework imposed by the 1996 year project and by state capture through governance decay, corruption, and theft at the end. The SICP is basically saying the challenge in the past 25 years of our democracy, what we are facing now, is the combined impact of neoliberal policies and state capture. And both these things. The neoliberal and state capture networks are seeking to impose their models in other key areas, such as in the network infrastructure areas, in the water sector, in the ports, in the railway networks, to name but a few. In the information and communications technology sector, the neoliberals are pushing wholesale privatization of the broadband spectrum. As the SICP, we are against this. We are saying the massive spectrum that is set aside for public services like education and health, for instance, including, by the way, allocating spectrum to cooperatives where necessary and other public-owned entities and activities. Sadly, the medium-term budget policy statement delivered to Parliament last month, by the new Minister of Finance, pushes auctioning the broadband spectrum with no mention of a set aside for the state to pioneer national development imperatives, so that government can be able to fulfill its constitutional obligations, including ensuring national security. We call on the Minister of Finance to revise this problematic stance. The key task facing the SACP and the working class from now on is to intensify the struggle on two fronts, as we have said, against neoliberalism policy regime, not least its agenda of prosperity, as well as state capture networks, which are characterized by rampant corruption. We are saying that the SACP and the working class will continue to expose and tackle deception by neoliberal elements as well. What is of concern to us as well is that those who are pushing for neoliberal methods, they do this on the grounds that we are fighting state capture. We are saying you can't fight state capture with neoliberal methods, because at the end of the day, the net impact of these two types of activity is actually the impoverishment of the working class and enriching the already very wealthy in society. The SICP will also push for the development and expansion of the publicly owned economic sector to take care of the material needs of the people. The working class needs to unite behind the strategic imperative and to defend the publicly owned economic sector against neoliberal and state capture agenda. Joint action by the progressive trade union movement remains essential. As a matter of fact, the Central Committee said the SACP must prioritize supporting joint action by the trade union across federations to fight common battles. They can't afford to be divided when the capitalist forces are united in making profits at all costs. The SACP will strengthen its efforts and engagement with the progressive trade union movement in this regard to make sure that workers pursue their common interests. Convening a joint summit of the progressive trade union movement is an imperative and can contribute positively to taking this proposal of building worker unity forward. In the same manner, the Central Committee tasked the Politburo and the Secretariat of the SACP to initiate a process to convene a conference of left forces. This action is in line with the SACP resolution to build a popular left front. The conference of the left should reflect on the multiple crises facing South Africa, the persistent high rate of unemployment, poverty, inequality, and the associated crises of families struggling to make ends meet, as well as this conference of the left must focus on what is to be done with regards to the energy crisis and the climate change crisis that is facing us. This, we hope, will serve as a platform to expand consultation on a joint program of action and mobilization. As the SACP, we are saying, we've been arguing for our own policy perspective in front of the television for too long now. It's time really for more action. Not that we've not taken action in the past, like we've done in the financial sector and with led issues. But we want to intensify this by broadening and bringing together the forces that have got a common interest with us in realizing the defeat of both the state capture agenda and the neoliberal agenda. On the just energy transition, the SACP invited Comrade Barbara Christie in her capacity as the Minister of Forestry, Fisheries and Environmental Affairs. She made a very good presentation on the environment, climate change, and the just energy transition. The minister also briefed the Federal Committee about the outcome of COP26, the Conference of Parties on the Environment and Climate Change that was recently held in Scotland. The SACP commits to support the progressive thrust of the government's program on this front towards achieving net zero carbon emissions, whilst also mobilizing progressive forces on the ground. But at the same time, the Central Committee said we must not allow developed countries to set an agenda of climate change that simply suits them and at the expense of developing countries. Investment in ESCOM and state capacity in the renewable power generation capacity and building social ownership in energy is a key imperative for a just transition. Putting profit-seeking interest before the people using energy as a commodity will only result in unjust practice. Doing so will condemn the state to a procurer exposed to the whims of the private wealth accumulation market. Energy will not be put to the people if it is privatized, and it will not advance nationally. In short, and to put this simply, renewables, for instance, in energy must not be the exclusive reserve of the private sector. ESCOM and communities must actually be involved in the areas of and renewable energy, so that this is not just like the private sector. Protecting workers and creating alternative employment must be part of what is called the just transition. Any transition that will cause misery through retrenchments, amongst others, and leaving ghost towns behind will be unjust. Also important, while considering international development, South Africa must plan the transition from the standpoint of our national priorities and our challenges. On the unemployment crisis, unemployment rose in the third quarter of 2021 by 0.5% to 34.9%, affecting 7.6 million active unemployed workers. Looking at the total picture represented by what is known as the expanded definition, South African unemployment crisis is worse than is depicted by the officially prepared narrative. It is a disastrous 46.6, having increased by 2.2% in the third quarter of 2021. This affects approximately 12.9 million active and discouraged work seekers. This monumental disaster needs to be understood in all its dimensions, including race, gender, age, and geography. In this way, South Africa will inform its interventions in a much better way. Just to explain, unfortunately, but scandalously, near 30 years after our democratic breakthrough, unemployment is strongly marked by racial and gender. African unemployment is at a shocking 51.1%. That is amongst Africans. Unemployment among all women is at 55.1% compared to 42% for men. Youth unemployment is a catastrophic 77.4% for those aged between 15 to 24, and 55.3% for those aged 25 to 34 years. Geographically, the worst unemployment levels are in rural areas. The former Bantustans are the hardest hit. They still resemble their status under apartheid as labor reservoirs for monopoly capital and productive activity in metropolitan areas. In the former Bantustan areas, for instance, there is no industrial development and notable job opportunities. There is little, if any, at all opportunities for sustainable livelihood in these former Bantustan areas. You can smell poverty in the Bantustan area, in particular, in the former Bantustan areas. Policies aimed at addressing the unemployment crisis must also be aimed at achieving transformation in terms of race, in terms of gender and youth, and also to prioritize rural development so that we roll back uneven development and unequal distribution of investment and resources. On social policy and public employment programs, governmental community, or worse still, short-sighted austerity is simply unacceptable. When government introduced the COVID-19 social relief grant of a meager 350 rand to assist those aged between 18 to 59 who do not receive any social grant, there were over 9.5 million applications. This just shows the level of desperation in our society. Some 6.5 million of these applications were eventually approved. Meager as it is, a certain level of nevertheless. But now the medium-term budget policy statement has announced that this extremely small grant will be terminated at the end of March. This will have the effect of millions of unemployed sinking deeper into deprivation and destitution, with no alternative amidst the worsening unemployment crisis and the economic impact of the emergent fourth wave of COVID-19. It is imperative that the widest range of working class and popular forces actively mobilize in the coming period for the social relief distress grant to be extended at least beyond March, and that the amount is significantly increased, and that this becomes the first and rapid step towards establishing a universal basic income grant and the establishment of a comprehensive social security system. By the way, there is no contradiction, and also there is no choice between the social relief grant and provision of money for education and skills development in order to empower especially young to be able to make sustainable livelihood for themselves. Both things need to be done. And some of the immediate intervention should include scaling up of public employment programs, both to provide relief against unemployment and to expand the provision of skills development. Public employment programs will contribute positively towards establishing the right to work in our country. The SACP is going to be throwing everything into calling for and supporting and actively encouraging government to provide public employment programs, because there are so many things that need to be done in our community that require public employment programs, like cleaning of our townships and villages and providing of social and economic structures in our townships and villages. All those are important platforms for public employment programs. On taking forward the fight against COVID-19, we wish to salute, as the SACP, the work of South African scientists through genomic surveillance. This work has helped and even provided leadership to the entire world in identifying new variants of COVID-19. The Central Committee denounced the imperialists and other governments that have shut the borders of their countries against entry by South African and Southern African people. As if, by the way, the Omicron variant of COVID-19 originated in Southern Africa. The fact of the matter is that the spread of this virus right now is global. And in fact, the new variant may have come from anywhere in the world. including from outside the African continent. This assumption that this came from the African continent is wrong. And in any case, we are closing the borders after the fact. And I feel like this time using, sorry for the language, the best description of what the advanced countries are doing. That they think they're going to have vaccines, vaccinate their populations, and leave the developing world to work for itself and hope to defeat COVID-19 and hope that they will close their borders. That won't work. According to a colleague of ours and a comrade of ours from the Communist Party of the United States of America, he said such an approach. It's like all of you, we are in the swimming pool having a nice swim, and then having a corner of the swimming pool being reserved for those who want to eat. That's what is actually happening. In the face of the situation, the SACP calls on all our people. Nevertheless, to up our vaccinating numbers is the best way to fight against this deadly virus, whilst also at the same time maintaining the health protocols of physical distance, washing our hands, sanitizer, and wearing our masks. The SACP calls upon government to urgently also resolve the matter of medicines acquired by the South African National Defense Force from Cuba. The South African Health Regulatory Authority, the Central Committee, said, must stop making statements on this matter of Cuban medicine to the South African National Defense Force. Must stop making statements that are insensitive, that in fact border on recklessness, and make their statements come across as if SAFRA is imposing a second blockade on Cuba after the United States. To actually say we're going to go and impound these medicines and destroy them is offensive to the majority of the people of South Africa. That's not the role of a regulatory agency or any other agency of the state. We have diplomatic relations with the Cubans who sacrifice their lives to make sure that we have a democratic South Africa today. Central Committee said we must communicate this statement very strongly. It doesn't take kindly to this. On international situation and solidarity, the SACP expressed its concern about situations of instability in the Southern African region. Besides political and economic challenges in Lesotho, Zimbabwe, Swaziland, and Mozambique, the SACP is concerned about what seems to be an impending instability in Botswana. The tensions between the current President Masisi, and former President of Botswana, Ian Khama, pose a serious problem of instability in that country, if not worse. We are also concerned that the South African Reserve Bank seems to be unfairly implicated in funds allegedly stolen in Botswana. We know that this is not the case and it must be corrected. SADC, we're calling upon to pay close attention to this developing situation in Botswana so that it does not lead to instability. Our region cannot afford any more instability, and leave South Africa, because every area of instability in the SADC region has got huge implications for South Africa. We are calling for the intervention also led by SADC to be intensified in Swaziland, especially the establishment of inclusive dialogue processes amongst all political actors. This we say must be expedited so that a negotiated transition to democracy is realized in Swaziland. The SACP also denounces the call made by imperialist countries to boycott the Beijing Winter Olympics in China, ostensibly as part of the new Cold War waged by the United States from China. This is all because of China's impressive economic growth and development that is advancing to surpass the United States economy. The SACP wishes to pledge its solidarity with the people of Sudan in their struggle for democracy, the people of Western Sahara in their struggle against occupation by Morocco, and the people of Palestine against occupation by the apartheid regime. We also reiterate our solidarity with Cuba and saying that Cuba has a right to pursue its own economic program. Also, our solidarity with the Venezuelan people, the Bolivian people, and Nicaragua against US-led direct. We welcome the reimagined consolidation of and advances by left and progressive forces in Latin America, including in countries like Peru, Honduras, and Chile. This underlines our point that neoliberalism is not the solution, but the cause of the problems and challenges faced by the workers and poor in the world. Increasingly, the people of Latin America are rejecting the neoliberal program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, TS. Let me invite questions from our media colleagues. Thank you, Samantha. And you will be number 2. I saw. Okay, fine. Is there any other questions? Let's take your salute first there and speak around.
Thank you. Mr. Zipande and the rest of the SACP officials, essentially, when you look and you speak about what you term the unholy alliances in the minority governments within the metros, till today, no governments have been formed in these metros. There are no MMCs. What needs to be done in order for these metros to have effective governments being constituted by the coalitions that have been formed that will service the people? Secondly, the statement speaks of the IFP. As a former student in northern India, someone who has worked with many ANC leaders in that province to change the electoral fortune of local governments in the province. What does it mean when you see the resurgence of the IFP, and particularly with the plan that they had to have an entire blockade of the northern provinces, they're taking all the district municipalities and local municipalities in order to launch an offensive to take over the province? As someone who's worked with ANC structures in that province, what does the recent local government results mean for the future of the province of KwaZulu-Natal? And then lastly, you speak about this unity and lack of cohesion within the governing party. This has been pretty much in your statements for the past 6 or 7 years. Is the ANC just simply irreparable and can't have any cohesion and must just simply implode? Thank you.
Thank you, TS.
Should I go ahead?
Yes.
Yeah, someday we knew that you always fire some. And that's your job. We respect that. Precisely. The point we're raising about the failure of this minority government in the metros to form a government underlines the point we are saying. It's a sign already that there's going to be instability, because it's minority governments that are not forced on principle. They are based on an anti-ANC platform instead of being based on uniting for provision of services and changing the circumstances of the workers of our country. It also shows the extent to which, of course, there's been fragmentation in the voting of the people, and we've explained partly the non-voting bloc that has led us to this unfortunate situation. On our side, we are saying where we are the opposition, the ANC and its alliance partners, we must watch the situation very closely, and we must have massive not for the sake of opposition, but to point out what is it that needs to be done correctly. That is going to be our responsibility. If you ask me what is to be done, that's going to be our responsibility. But we are in for a rocky period. There is no doubt about it. But there is no principle. I've never had a party saying our whole aim of participating in the election was to dislodge the ANC. What kind of a program? A negative program. So the results is what we are seeing now. Unfortunately, such instance means worse for the ordinary people of our country, desperately need services. My comrades will add on this. Only instance of the development. Because, by the way, the ANC had made these huge advances in 2019 and even 2025. As the only party really that is capable of national compromise, of pursuing the progressive agenda. But again, largely, if we are honest, we need to be self-critical. The ANC needs to be self-critical in KZN, together and its allies, as to the reasons why we've actually lost so much ground. And it's a reflection of the problems that we've actually lost. Factionalism, deep internal divisions, marginalization of the allies, and we've always realized in one cases that those of our friends in the ANC think that the ANC made advances by alienating allies. The SACP and FOSA are wrong. They must disabuse themselves. Partly of what we are seeing is precisely. But also we are saying that there is an economic interest that has been grown inside the structures of the ANC as well. What we call the bureaucratic and parasitic bureaucracy, which is capturing municipal budgets, for mass based. KZN also participates. With that happening, there's been very poor provision. We must take to heart the message that and we know this problem. The ANC itself has said it right way in its own assessment. Let me just tell you one example. For me, somewhere when I was campaigning, I'm sorry if I'm taking long. It was in my hometown, in an area which is predominantly working class people. They point a building, which is like the size of 2 RDP houses. They say this is the 3rd municipal campaign now. We are coming over the past 10 years. We are coming to us to say we must vote for you. Look at that building. We have asked the municipality to demolish that. In 10 years, the municipality can't demolish it. Let alone build it. Just to demolish that building. Now, those are some of the things that must be. There's nothing as easy as demolish two buildings. Now, those are some of the things we must accept as a movement. And that moving forward, we must not allow those. Those are some of the things that have cost us affected. Otherwise, how do you explain the advances we make? And also, there's been a certain level of arrogance on our side in the movement, and a distance that has begun to develop between ourselves and the people. That's what renewal must address. That's why we say a supporting instead of ANC on renewal. Which leads to your last question. Is the ANC irreparable? We don't believe that the ANC is irreparable. But there is a huge challenge. A huge challenge. That's what we're discussing in leading this renewal. That is why also we are saying this renewal must not just be moralistic. It must be very concrete. How do we defeat factions? In fact, as the movement, we might as well accept that there can't be unity between the ANC and thieves who are hiding inside the African National Congress and our allies. There can't be unity. Part of the renewal is to build a new leadership in our movement that is actually committed to addressing the issues of the people. We haven't lost hope. That is why we are saying, coming out of this one of the key challenges is to rebuild an ANC that has got confidence of people. When we are calling on communists and the weapons of this country, go into the structures of the ANC in your own right as members of the African National Congress and reclaim this. You know, let me just give you another example. Why would we? Not only is that the ANC is not repairable, but why we need the ANC? This country needs an ANC, a broad movement capable of uniting the widest range of forces behind building a non-racial, non-sexist, prosperous South Africa. All these other political parties, none of them are political. You look at the DA, for example, the DA is fighting and uniting minority interests in the white, Indian, and colored community out of fear of the African majority. They don't have a vision of building a non-racial and a better South Africa. And you need an ANC. Of course, you need a different ANC than where it is now in many of these structures. I don't know if my comrade would like to add.
Let me take the follow-up question. Yes.
Mr. Zibande, you're from America. Please, but to go further, to go further, your statement speaks about the vaccine in Cuba by the former minister and how you speak and how you Sabras a second location. But you can set them, but you sit in the cabinet. Your own president, they said nothing. They said nothing. In fact, he's gone even further. His administration. No vaccine from any vaccine can be currently being rolled out in the country. We are seeing Pfizer and your own administration has no confidence in vaccine. So why defend the vaccine? Well, you can't even persuade government to go and procure it. Thank you.
Yes, GS, can I ask Comrade Mopala to take this question?
Yes.
And I will rest you for a moment.
Yes. Now Alex is deploying. No, it's okay. You are very much. Thank you very much. Look, firstly, we think that the government really has to change its strategy on the utilization of the available vaccines. Cuba also is from the vaccine. But this medication we are talking about is not a vaccine, but an available antiviral medication before COVID-19 vaccine was developed in the world. And it has been used extensively in the world in places like Italy, Spain, Germany, China, Mexico, and other places. Which, of course, it was important that our defense was able to procure the medication in order to protect its soldiers, who were also being deployed in the front line in the fight against COVID-19, particularly to enforce the lockdown measures. Therefore, then we have got a problem regarding how SAPRA managed that. But not only this medication, there are several other medications of importance. For instance, Cuba has even won international awards on this medication, even from World Health Organization, for developing medication that cures sugar diabetes. We've got a serious crisis with sugar diabetes. We amputate people. They've got medication that can stop amputation of people. We've provided the health department in the past, even with figures of amputations in our hospital, that can be stopped almost as soon as it's possible. They just don't care because it's medication from Cuba at the expense of our people. To SAPRA and other such institutions, while they're playing an independent role in our country, unfortunately, from outside, you can see that they actually carry out the mandate of Big Pharma.
Western countries. The first vaccine on COVID-19 to be produced was Sputnik 5 from Russia. It has not been allowed for use in this country. You know what's the reason? In the main, which is the lung, they say it has got this enzyme called AFD5, which is apparently immunosuppressant. And because South Africans, there's too much prevalence of HIV and AIDS, therefore it cannot be used in this country. As if the majority of South Africans are HIV positive. It's completely nonsensical and unacceptable, particularly from the perspective of science. Then the Russians from the Gamaleya Institute, a very reputable institute that over the years, they've even developed the first vaccines against Ebola, for instance. They then developed Sputnik Light, which doesn't have that so-called immunosuppressant. They still can qualify. It was the first, in fact, they use Western medication, these vaccines, in this country on clinical trials, when actually Sputnik had been passed or peer-reviewed by Lancet, had already passed all scientific measurements or scientific requirements as a vaccine. They never utilized it. So it's quite clear SAPRA has become a problem, and we'll have to take a fight against these problematic tendencies. Because as you are correctly saying, not only from BRICS countries, of course, yes, China's got multiple vaccines. Some of them, they are even available for us to use for free. Before we have enough so-called vaccines from these Western countries, which vaccines are now going to be imposed on our people. Our people must have the right to choose even what kind of vaccine they want to use. For instance, although I vaccinated with this Western medication, I had wanted to use the Sputnik, for instance, or even from Cuba, but the Sputnik was first. They didn't allow it to be used yet. China vaccine, Sinopharm, Sinovac, and so forth. They've got multiple vaccines, but they closed the border for this vaccine in this country. And I think ultimately we may have to require a forensic investigation on how they've allocated this vaccines as compared to how they rejected other vaccines, particularly from non-Western countries or non-capitalist countries, for instance. That's the main thing. But of course, government have to respond effectively to this and not only think that it is this institution. Because sometimes we give too much faith in this institution in the name of democracy. And we think that they will do good. And then these institutions are captured by Western interest, not by the interest of South African people. That's the thing that we have to respond. So it has nothing to do, per se, for instance, with individually the presence of competence demanding in government. But we have called for government overall to create and build capacity to develop our own vaccines as a country. But at the moment, vaccines that are here, they should not be discriminated on the basis of where they come from. Science is science. It's the same thing like we are discriminated for discovering these variants by the way. But when so-called non-Western countries discover vaccines, we use the same thing, unacceptable.
So maybe I just need to add, I'm not here speaking on behalf of the government. I think that Comrade Sodi has covered our strategy very well, excellent, which I'm part of. But I think I can defend the president in one. The president has said, even to myself and my capacity as Minister of Science, go and work with BRICS countries on the issue of vaccines. Even now, the president will say, President wants you that we take forward this thing of work with BRICS countries. When it comes back, usually we go to the preference. As an individual, he has not stayed in BRICS countries. But what we are pointing out is that there are certain serious interests that are protecting only the interests of Western countries and their big pharmaceutical at the expense of exploring, working with China, Russia, Cuba, and so on.
Thank you, GS, and thank you, leadership. Just before I close, to make sure that all questions asked are asked comprehensively and there is no other question. And let me just check if there is any last bite on the question. Otherwise, I will take this opportunity, colleagues, to thank you for coming to give this important press briefing of the SACP Central Committee coverage. While there have been changes in media from the perspective of technology, the reality is that your work remains important. And when we see you coming to give us coverage, we are happy because you are in your work, you are in employment. That is crucial, and your work is productive work. It's not just employment for the sake of employment. Please convey our sincere gratitude to your management and those you report to for giving us this important coverage. We have not held a press conference as the SACP for over 4 months now. Thank you very much. I will then close this press briefing. Thank you, colleagues.